He has become an absolute media darling. He is Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, which both of these are available at goodgunbadguy.net. So you want to check him out right now and pick up a copy of the books Behind the Lies of the Anti-Gun Radical, as well as his new book, Destroying the Anti-Gun Narrative. And we welcome Dan Wos back to this edition of the Michael Hart Show. Good morning, my brother.
Hey, Michael, thank you very much. That's very nice. And coming from you, the rock star of Birmingham, I appreciate that very much.
Well, I don't know if I'm the rock star of Birmingham, but you are definitely becoming the rock star of the movement to destroy the anti-gun radicals. And you've been getting a lot of good press. We're so happy for you, so proud for you. Tell us a little bit more about the books for those that might be just first-time listeners. We've got some brand-new listeners to the program. New folks are tuning in each and every day, and we want them to have an idea because the book, I've read both of them, Dan, and, I do so much reading because of my job. It's very rare for me to sit down with a book and read all the way through it, but I did that with both of yours because they're just so compelling.
Oh, well, thanks. And as a matter of fact, your listeners should know that you wrote an endorsement for the second one, and I appreciated that very much. And I got tired of all the anti-gun rhetoric, propaganda, and all the nonsense, and I watched people fall for it. I watched people believe all the BS and all the fear tactics that the anti-gun side of the conversation uses. So I started dissecting it, and I started exploring it and trying to understand what was really going on with the messaging. So in Good Gun, Bad Guy, the first book, I uncover a lot of the terminology they use and the strategies and the tactics and all the stuff that makes those poor people on the left fall for the nonsense. It makes the people on the left so scared of guns and so angry and hateful toward gun owners. Well, all that stuff is fabricated. It's created with the narrative that they put out there. And in my books, I talk about that stuff and help people see when that's being used, because it often goes unnoticed, but it has a very powerful, manipulative way of changing the way people think about guns. So what I try to do is I try to expose all that stuff so people can see it coming.
Well, you know what's interesting, and you and I have talked about this on the air, and I don't know that a lot of people realize you and I talk on the phone fairly frequently off the air.
Yeah.
And we were talking a couple weeks ago about the anti-gunner strategy and how unbelievably similar it is to what we saw with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. And how you lay these accusations out there that are unsubstantiated. For example, Roe versus Wade will be overturned immediately. Here we are, Kavanaugh's first week, no mention of Roe versus Wade whatsoever. We really didn't think there would be. Don't know the Supreme Court will take that up anytime in the near future. But how similar it was with the accusations from people like Kamala Harris and Spartacus and Dianne Feinstein and a whole bevy of others. And the rhetoric is almost identical. So it's a strategy that, has not really taken root with the anti-gun radical, at least in terms of those with an IQ above that of a trash can lid. And it didn't take root with the Kavanaugh confirmation.
No, but I mean, unfortunately, some people will fall for it. But for the most part, anybody who's thinking logically and who critically thinks this stuff at least one layer deep. I have a 19-year-old son, and he's a brilliant kid, and I don't know how it happened, but he just is. And what he says is, he goes, "Dad, I watch these people get so angry on the left, and they fall for the instant gratification of going along with the hateful narrative or whatever." He says they don't think to the next level or the next layer. He said they're just single layer thinkers, and they go along with whatever is spoon-fed to them. And I said, yeah, you're right, because we actually, at our house, we have conversations at the dinner table, and we critically think this stuff through, and we go through layers, and we say, okay, so what's going to happen if that takes place? Why do they think that? What's the cause of that thought process? How are these people being influenced on that particular topic. And we talk about this stuff, whereas most people just watch the, they eat whatever's on the menu that comes from left-wing media, and most often the food is full of maggots.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, that you bring that up because the narrative on the Second Amendment has been so consistent in recent years, and it's so unbelievably obvious to anybody that pays attention to it. So give us a little bit of an idea. I love the fact that you have pointed out things like buzzwords and phraseology. So give us a little bit of an idea when we're having these conversations, because it's so interesting to me. And even in a conversation that I had with one of my weekly regular guests, her name is Megan Barth, was on yesterday, and we were talking about how, when you have conversations with liberals, it's hard to have a conversation with a liberal because they are so steeped in their beliefs. And, on the conservative side, we can argue, we can debate and do whatever, but the liberals, they get all flustered, they raise their voices, they start repeating the same kind of phraseology over and over. So give us a little bit of an idea, if we do engage a liberal in this conversation, what kind of responses might we hear from them?
Well, okay, let's start with one thing. We can start with assault weapon. That term, assault weapon, is
an AR.
Well, yeah, and what happened with assault weapon? This is interesting, and if you go back into the 90s, you'll see Dianne Feinstein holding up an AR platform, Armalite style rifle, and calling it an assault weapon. This is what they started to do in the 90s. They started to bring that term into the public forum. And just for the purpose of scaring people, assault weapon is a scary term. And, so what they did was they brought that in. They use that term all the time. Now, many people have many different definitions of assault weapon. It could be a semi-automatic, which now they're trying to deem assault weapons. It could be fully automatic. It could have a pistol grip or a scope or extended magazine, or any different number of different things that could be determined in assault weapon. So there's no real definition of assault weapon. Most of the time, people don't know. The people who throw that term around don't really have a solid definition. So I ask them, I say, just so we're clear, and I know what we're talking about, could you define assault weapon for me? And they never can, because they hear these terms and they're like trained puppies, and they go out and they repeat it, and they're scared of the term, and they scare their friends with the term, and the media scares everybody. And it's all just a big propaganda attempt, and it's a big anti-gun landscape that they create. So that's one of the things. If you want a response, I just ask them, what do you mean? And when you ask them, you put them on the other end of the question, they have to search for answers, and they often don't have them. So it's a way of, rather than getting into the debates, because we're always getting into debates about statistics and all this stuff, and gun owners do this all the time. It's a lot easier if you just ask them what they mean.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because, a lot of folks might not be familiar with the term Socratic Method. And, of course, that is a reference to Socrates. And, back in the day, obviously, many, 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 many years ago, when Socrates was engaging people in thought, or he was teaching, or, he was trying to make a point, he would very oftentimes answer a question with a question. And he would force people to answer the question that he asked, as opposed to engaging in debate. Because, you and I, and I've likened it, here in the state of Alabama, to the debate between Auburn and Alabama fans. And although, these debates have been going on for decades in this state, you're not going to change the mind of an Alabama fan, but you're not going to change the mind of an Auburn fan. These are two different bases of people. They have their own beliefs. They have their own desires. They have their own fanhood, if you will, in the support of their teams. Now, a lot of it's just fun and funny, and it's kind of silly here during football season in the state of Alabama, but it's pretty much lighthearted at the same time. But in the sense of gun ownership and usage, it's a lot more heated, obviously. But when you turn the question, as you point out, back to them in the form of a question, asking them, in this case, what an AR is, and they have no response, it forces them to do something that they haven't previously done, which is think about why the way they think they think.
Yeah. Exactly. And like I said, at our kitchen table, at our dinner table, we do this to each other, my family and me, my wife, my son, and myself.
That's just the New Yorker in you.
Well, maybe, but it's, it helps you understand life, and you raising kids. And sometimes it's better, it's most often better for people to think for themselves and explore their own thought process and find their own beliefs on these things. And, the truth is our brains are problem-solving devices. When we're presented with a question, our brains instantly take action to try to solve that question or that problem. And when you put your accuser or you're the person who's trying to shut you down, when you put them on the other end of a question, you put them back on their heels. And if you notice when you're watching, these CNN debates or any news, show, the host never likes to answer questions because they lose control of the conversation that way when they're on the back end of the question. So, I remember Megyn Kelly was asked a question by a guest who was aware of this process, and she said, "I'm asking the questions."
Right. Yeah.
She wouldn't answer because she didn't want to be put on the back end of it. She didn't want to be put on her heels. She wanted to hold control of that conversation.
Right. Dan, I want to take a real quick break. Can I get you to hold on for me for a couple of minutes?
Sure thing.
When I come back on the other side, I want to talk just a bit about some of these questions because I think that's a brilliant thought on your point and certainly a way to engage the anti-gunner left a little bit more than we have in the past. So I want to go a little instructional on the other side. We're having a conversation with Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2. You're listening to The Michael Hart Show. Stick around. Hey, welcome back. We're having a conversation with Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. Dan, in the previous segment, you hit on a really interesting point, and I want to take this out of the gun debate just for a moment because I know that you're on Facebook, you have a social media presence, we do here as well. And very oftentimes, people will get on Facebook and they get in these very heated debates. And number one, they're a complete time waster. But, number two, it's people, this is my position, and the other guy has their position, and it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and there's almost never a resolution. But there's also never the presence of a question. And, why you think the way you think, and what makes you draw that conclusion, and, what does AR in this case, actually stand for? It's kind of tantamount to, your wife walking up to you before a date on the town and saying, "Do these jeans make my butt look fat?" There's never a good response to that outside of why would you ask me that, honey? But the point is that it's when you start asking people why they think the way that they think that they oftentimes have trouble going beyond the original statement that they made, because frequently the statement that they made was not of their own thinking, not of their own determination.
Good point.
And you see that in the gun debate as well. And so I want to encourage people through you and your book and your works to stop laying down just your data-based arguments and start asking people why they think the way that they do. And very frequently, we will discover, whether it's the gun debate or confirmation or the genes debate, that when you force people to give you the rationale for why they believe what they do, they very oftentimes unravel their own arguments, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. And what I found is the reason people do these arguments, these Facebook arguments and these Twitter arguments and all this stuff, most often is because they need to be right. Because we doubt ourselves a lot, and secretly in the back of our minds we doubt ourselves on just about everything. So if we can publicly be right about something, it seems to be a human trait that we feel better about ourselves. So in other words, if I can prove you wrong and prove me right, then I feel good about myself. It doesn't really matter if it's true or not. Unfortunately, sometimes that's some of the things that we do because, if I can convince you of something, well, then I can simultaneously convince myself of it or convince myself that I'm right about it.
Doesn't that then imply that for some of the anti-gun crowd that they have doubts about their beliefs?
I would absolutely say yes to that. And here's a perfect example about this. And I use the gun debate because it's what I talk about most, and it really shines a light on this topic within the gun debate. People will say things like, "What should we do about gun violence?" They ask gun owners this question: "What should we do about gun violence?" So instantly, the person who's asked the question is thinking, "Oh my God, well, I don't know. I got to come up with some answers here. I got to justify my position, right?" So we start thinking of, well, if it was for this or that, and we start arguing on their landscape. But let me show you something about that question. What should we do about gun violence? We're not even questioning their term. They're setting up this landscape. They're setting up this presupposed narrative that there is such a thing as gun violence. There isn't. Let me just break that news to everyone. There's no such thing as gun violence. It's human violence. But we argue and we play ball on their field by trying to answer questions based on their false narrative of gun violence. This is a human violence thing. If we were to stop and say, wait a minute, your question is it creates a false narrative that you're trying to get me to answer. Gun violence doesn't exist, first of all. Let's talk about gun violence first, and then I'll ask you, and then we can talk about what we should do about the problem of killings.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you hit on another great point, and it kind of goes back to the Kavanaugh hearings where, how in the world do you prove the non-existence of something which never happened?
Bingo.
And so if somebody has a false narrative or a false belief as it relates to gun ownership, and they level that our direction, and we argue them on a non-point, we can't win it.
And they know they have us on the ropes because they know that our brains instantly want to take action to solving the problem. But the problem that they present to us is a non-starter, really.
It's a straw problem.
It's a straw problem, exactly. A straw man kind of thing, exactly.
Is that something that they're taught just by virtue of media saturation? I mean, are they that smart? And is the gun supporting right that not up to speed with the ways to defend this? Because all of a sudden, all these things are popping into my head, and again, I'm back to the Socratic Method, and getting people to justify why they think the way they think. And when they realize that they don't know why they think the way they think, then all of a sudden they have to admit that they haven't thought it through.
Well, I believe that the pundits, the media. The people on news broadcasts who are doing these shows, I believe they know these strategies. But what happens is the people who are watching the shows and the people who listen to these things, they take this stuff in and they don't realize what's happening there. They don't realize that the questions are being asked in a false narrative. So people who watch get influenced by this stuff. But the people who are asking the questions, the Don Lemons, the Rachel Maddows, and these people, they understand these strategies when they're asking these questions. That's why I said earlier, they don't want to be on that backside of the question because they know the strategies that they're using.
Well, you know what else is interesting about the questioning method of defense goes back to Megyn Kelly, because when Kelly says, I'm the one asking the questions, that's an admittance in my mind anyway. That's an admittance right there that I can't respond to your position. And
she got frustrated in that moment, and I noticed it when I saw because the person who was asking questions, he may have been doing it because he knew what she was doing, or he may have just really wanted to hear her answer, but she knew that the minute she was put on that end, she would be ineffective.
Well, it's interesting about that. For years, I followed the motivational speaker, Tony Robbins. And Tony,
me too.
He's fond of saying that the quality of our lives often comes down to the quality of questions we ask ourselves and not the quality of answers, because if the quality of question is not there, the quality of question doesn't matter because you're answering a false narrative. And so you've hit on an absolutely brilliant point here. It's a matter of asking the right questions as opposed to having the right data. That's fascinating, Dan.
Well, thank you. And I know you think about this stuff, and I hope that we can get more people in the gun owners to understand this stuff and understand what's happening and anti-gunners too.
Right.
They don't get it.
Well,
they take it for a ride.
We want to, pardon the expression, arm people with the truth, but also arm people with the strategies you speak of. Both the books, Good Gun, Bad Guy, and Good Gun, Bad Guy 2, contain these strategies. So tell the listeners how they can pick up a copy today.
They can go to goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com or search Good Gun, Bad Guy on Amazon.
Excellent. Dan, knocked it out of the park as always. Thank you, my brother. We'll be talking very shortly.
Thanks, pal. Look forward to it.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, stick around. 2 hours to go on this edition of The Michael Hart Show.
If you want more interviews by me, click one of the videos on the right. And remember, your Second Amendment, it's not a privilege, it's your right.